The wind cut like glass across the open plain, dragging brittle stalks of grass sideways as if trying to erase them. It howled over the scorched earth, past the weather-worn signpost, half sunk in dust, and into the hollowed-out church where the windows had long since surrendered to time. A single figure moved against the grain of it all, cloak, pulled tight bonnet, askew, a girl with 5 children in tow, their shadows long behind them. They had come on foot the last mile. The wagon had broken outside of town, axles splintered like bone, left leaning in the gully as if ashamed. She hadn't looked back. Couldn't. The youngest clung to her skirt, 2 more followed with dull eyes and cracked lips. The oldest, a boy no older than 10, carried the infant against his chest, arms trembling under the weight. No one spoke. They reached the edge of the town, if it could still be called that. Just 6 buildings and a memory of a main street, 1 saloon, 1 store, a shuttered telegraph office, and a blacksmith's shed that hadn't known a hammer in years. No horses, no wagons. Just the whimper of wind slipping under door frames. She stopped near the well. The crank was rusted stiff. She tried anyway, hand red with effort, until a trickle fell into the tin pail, barely enough to coat the bottom. She passed it to the children one at a time, wiping the rim between each. The baby got the last drop, wetting his lips like it was a promise. The sun was dipping now, stained with blood and smoke. They had no place to go. No letter of introduction. Just a name someone had given her weeks back, scrawled in pencil on the inside of a torn Bible, Jackson Ridge. A rancher, they said, keeps to himself. Don't expect kindness. Doesn't deal with trouble. But she had nothing left but names and the silence that came after a door closed. The children were too tired to keep standing. She let them sit near the church steps while she walked. Her legs ached from days in the saddle, days more on foot. The hem of her dress was stiff with dust and something darker. Her hands were cracked at the knuckles, split like dry bark. She had buried her husband 6 weeks ago under an oak tree in Tennessee, left the grave unmarked. There wasn't time to grieve. Just run. Just survive. The road stretched uphill, turning from town toward the dark rise of hills. No gate, no trail markers, just fence posts swallowed by tall grass. She walked until she saw the house, long and low, wood grayed by sun, porch sagging in the middle. Smoke curled faint from the chimney. Not welcoming, not unwelcoming, just there. She knocked once, then again, then waited. He opened the door, slow. A tall man, maybe 35, with the look of someone who had been built by labor, wide shoulders, hands like tools, face cut with time but not cruelty. His eyes took her in with no sign of surprise, like he already knew she was coming. "I'm not looking for work," she said before he could speak. Her voice was hoarse, dry from walking. "Just a place. Somewhere for my children. We can work. Any way you need?" He didn't answer, just looked past her down the road as if measuring the distance to the broken wagon. "How many?" "5, she said. He scratched his jaw. "A lot of mouths. I'll make up for it." A silence stretched between them. A long tightrope silence. She felt her legs wobble beneath her but held still. She had begged once already this week. She wouldn't again. Finally, he stepped back. "They can sleep in the barn. You'll come inside. There's stew." She didn't cry. Not even when he handed her the bowl. Not when she brought the children in one by one and covered them with old quilts. Not when she sat by the fire with blistered feet and numb hands and smelled something besides sorrow. But later, when the house was quiet and the children were breathing steady in their sleep, she turned her face to the wall and let one tear fall. Only one. Wah. Outside the wind slowed. She woke before the sky softened, before even the birds dared stir. Her body ached with a deep buried weariness, but habit pushed her up. She moved quietly, careful not to wake the children, stepping barefoot onto the cool plank floor, wrapping the borrowed shawl tighter around her shoulders. The kitchen smelled of cold ashes and old wood. She set to work anyway, poking the embers until they caught, feeding them small kindling until a weak flame licked the underside of the kettle. She found a sack of flour and water from the pump. No eggs, no butter. Still, she mixed what she could and rolled it into rough biscuits, her hands remembering the rhythm, even if her heart didn't. When he came in from the barn, she didn't look up, just slid the pan into the oven and stepped aside. He shook off the cold, a flurry of straw and dust following him through the doorway. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know." His gaze lingered, not unkind but unreadable. He filled a tin cup from the kettle and leaned against the counter. He drank without flinching, as if boiling water didn't burn. She stayed silent. Finally, he asked, "Where's your husband?" "Dead. Long ago." "Not long enough." He nodded, and that was all. No follow-up, no offer of comfort. She liked that about him. The biscuits came out flat and tough, but he ate 3 without complaint. The children drifted in one by one, drawn by the heat and smell. He watched them, quiet, as they sat on the floor and tore into their food like small, desperate animals. When the youngest maid choked on a crumb, he moved, quick, firm hand on her back, a cup of water offered without a word. May blinked at him with wide eyes, then smiled. He didn't smile back, but something in him softened. After the meal he stood. "If you're staying, you'll work." "Don't want idlers." "I don't idle. I've got a north fence down, cattle wanderin' you ride." She hesitated. "I used to. You'll remember." He turned and was gone. She fed the children, gave the oldest boy, Isaiah, charge of the others, then pulled on boots that weren't hers and a coat that was too large. The morning was brittle with frost, but the sun was rising pale above the hills. She found him saddling 2 horses, one of them smaller with a nervous eye. He handed her the reins. "This one's light. She'll test you." The mare stamped and sidestepped. She took a breath, set her hand firm on the bridle, and mounted without a word. Her thighs screamed in protest, muscles not yet healed from weeks on the trail, but she didn't let it show. They rode in silence at first. The land unfolded around them, wide, sharp, endless. Hills like knuckles, trees stripped bare by wind. A hawk turned circles overhead. Down below, the earth was hard and unforgiving, stitched with barbed wire and weathered bones. She thought of her children in the barn. She thought of the little room in town where the midwife had told her bluntly that she wouldn't make it through another winter without help. That no one would hire a widow with 5 mouths and no land. Jackson Ridge didn't speak much, but she watched him when he wasn't looking. The way he rode loose in the saddle, as if part of the animal. The way he scanned the hills, always alert, like something could come out of them. Like something had once and he hadn't forgotten. At the fence, he handed her a spool of wire and nodded to the brake. She crouched without complaint, fingers stinging from cold and rust. He worked beside her in silence. They didn't talk, not much. Just handed tools back and forth, moved in rhythm. She bled once, slicing her palm open on the twisted metal, but she wrapped it in her skirt and kept working. He noticed, said nothing. When the sun dipped low again and the fence stood straight once more, he said, "You work harder than most men I've known." "I don't have the luxury not to." He studied her a moment longer, then swung into the saddle. "Come on. Let's get back before the coyotes do." That night, after the children were asleep and the lamps were out, she sat by the fire. He sat across from her, sharpening a knife on a whetstone. She asked, "Why'd you let us stay?" He didn't look up. "Didn't see the point in letting you freeze." "That all? That's enough." The knife scraped slow against stone. She nodded, and for the first time in weeks allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they were not beyond the reach of kindness. These tales are not finished, they are only resting. Subscribe and wake the next one. Snow came early that year. Not a soft, drifting kind, but the hard kind driven sideways by wind that sliced through coats and split lips. It fell in bitter sheets across the hills, swallowed the road back to town, and turned the ranch into an island of pale silence. She chopped wood until her arms gave out, hauled water from the creek once the well froze solid. Her boots cracked along the seams soaked through by noon. Still, she didn't stop. Not when the barn roof sagged under the weight of snow. Not when the baby coughed through the night, his small chest rattling like a loose hinge. She boiled pine needles and mixed them with honey, rubbed his feet with warm cloth. He got better. Slowly, but he got better. Jackson said little, but he noticed. Left extra logs by the door. Fixed a broken window latch without being asked. Hung blankets along the walls to keep the cold from creeping in too deep. He watched the children like someone unused to watching anyone, and yet did it anyway. One morning she found him outside shirtless under his coat, hammering nails into a new frame for the chicken coop. She brought him coffee. He took it without thanks, but didn't look away from her either. "You always like winter this much?" she asked, teeth chattering. "It keeps things honest," he said. "You either make it or you don't." She leaned against the post. "And you always make it." "Most winters, yeah." There was a pause. Then he added, quieter, "Lost someone once. Took me a while to get back on the horse, but I did." She didn't press, just nodded and sipped her own coffee. Somewhere behind them, the children's laughter rose from the barn. Isaiah had built a sled from scrap wood, and they were taking turns sliding down the hill behind the smokehouse. "They like it here," she said. "They don't know better," he replied. But his voice didn't carry the weight of cruelty, just fact. Later, when the snow broke and the sun stretched longer across the yard, she sat on the porch sewing patches onto coats. Jackson walked up from the pasture coat, over his shoulder shirt damp with sweat despite the cold. He handed her a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside was a pair of leather gloves, child-sized. 5 pairs, actually. Lined with wool, rough but warm. "They'll need 'em," he said. She looked up at him. "You didn't have to." He shifted his weight, suddenly uncertain. "Didn't say I did. Just figured. No one else was going to." She said nothing, just set the gloves aside and went back to sewing, but her hands shook a little. That night after supper, they all sat near the fire. Jackson dozed in the rocker boots still on. The baby curled in her lap, thumb in his mouth. Isaiah and May played checkers on the floor, using buttons for pieces. For once the house felt more than warm. It felt full. She watched Jackson's face in the firelight, the way his brow twitched in sleep, as if still listening to the wind outside. She wondered how long he'd been living like that, half in battle, half in retreat. Wondered if he'd ever had this before. A home. A sound other than silence. She didn't know what to call what was forming between them. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was something real. It moved quietly, like snow piling on a roof, weight you didn't notice until you felt it settle all around you. And she knew if nothing else she would fight for that weight, for the stillness of it, for the peace. By spring the ranch had turned soft at the edges. Snow melted into rivers that split the pastures, and green fought its way up through the frostbitten ground. The barn smelled of hay again instead of cold, and the cattle lowed in the mornings, restless with the change. She learned the rhythms of the place, which gate stuck when it rained, how the east fence always needed mending after a hard wind. She taught Isaiah to milk the goat, showed Maid how to keep the hens from pecking their own eggs. Jackson said little but noticed everything. When the chores were done well, he didn't praise. He simply didn't correct, and that was enough. One day she found a sack of seed on the porch. No note, no mention, just a quiet offering. She planted it in the back field with Isaiah, their fingers deep in the thawed soil. rows of beans and squash corn if the weather held. It felt like a declaration planting something, like saying we're staying. We belong here now. Still not all days were easy. A letter came in late April, scrawled in heavy script and sealed with the ink still smudged. She recognized the name, her brother-in-law Daniel, her dead husband's kin. She read it once standing by the stove, then folded it slow and tight like something that needed containing. Jackson came in with mud on his boots, took one look at her face and said nothing. Not then. But later, when the children were asleep and the lamps low, he asked trouble. She hesitated, then handed him the letter. Daniel wrote in legal tones full of polite threat. He'd heard she'd run off with the children, claimed he had right to them, said he would send a man to fetch them back unless she returned alone or agreed to custody. Jackson read it slow and silent. When he finished, he folded it in half and tossed it into the fire. She watched the flames take it. I have no money, she said. No lawyer. Nothing that proves they're mine. You have them, he said. That's what proves it. But he has land, friends in the court. He could. He won't take them. The certainty in his voice made her eyes sting. Not with tears, with something harder. You don't know that. I know this place, and I know men like him. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Let him come. In the days that followed, Jackson spent more time near the house. Sharpened tool, repaired hinges, made quiet preparations, though he never said for what. She started carrying the rifle when she went out past the pasture. But Daniel didn't come. Someone else did. A stranger rode in from town one hot morning in May. Clean boots, thick coat, the kind of man who never walked where he didn't want to. He asked for her by name. Jackson stepped between them before she could speak. The man handed over a letter, this one formal and cold. A threat wrapped in parchment. Legal ink and courthouse weight. Daniel wanted custody and he was going to make it official. Jackson didn't flinch. Just said, she's not leaving. Neither are the children. The man looked at her. Ma'am, I suggest you think long and hard. He's got connections. He can make this painful. I've already lived painful, she said. He left after that. Dust rose behind him and didn't settle for a long time. They spent the evening on the porch. Jackson whittled and she peeled apples for the pie she hadn't had the strength to make in months. The children chased fireflies in the yard. She said, you don't have to get involved. He looked up. You think I'd stand by and let them take what's yours? She didn't answer, just watched the children laughing in the dusk. Isaiah caught one in his hands and held it up, glowing between his fingers like something holy. Jackson said, I lost a son. Years ago. He was 5. Fever took him in one night. His mother left the next spring. The words came quiet, like a wind he'd been holding in his chest too long. I didn't know, she said. Don't talk about it much. I'm sorry. He nodded. I know. Silence held between them like something shared. Not heavy. Just real. Inside, the baby cried. She stood, but Jackson was already at the door. I'll get him, he said. She let him, and in that small, quiet gesture something changed. The hearing was set for late June. The notice came by rail, stamped with the county seal, cold and final. She read it on the porch, the paper shaking in her hand, though the air was still. Jackson stood behind her, silent. The sun pressed down on them both, heavy and unrelenting. I have to go, she said. He nodded once. You won't go alone. The morning they left, Isaiah stayed behind with May and the younger ones. The ranch hands' neighbors, who had become something closer to kin, promised to keep watch. Jackson hitched the wagon at dawn. She wore her best dress, the one with only 2 patches and buttons that matched. He had cleaned up too, though not so much it looked unnatural. His hair combed back. A clean shirt tucked in, still carried dust on his boots, still looked like the man who'd opened his door to her without asking why. The ride to town was long and quiet. Cornfields swayed on either side, green and gold in the wind. She stared straight ahead, her jaw tight. Jackson glanced at her now and then, but said nothing until the town came into view. He said, "You're their mother. There's not a soul alive who'll see you and not know that. They'll see what Daniel wants them to see. A widow with no land, no claim." He shook his head. "You've got more claim than any man with paper." The courthouse was a squat stone building with ivy crawling up the sides. They tied the horses and went inside together. The judge was a tired-looking man with a white mustache and eyes that had seen too many lies. Daniel was already there in a dark coat and polished shoes, sitting with his lawyer, some stiff-collared man who looked like he chewed on rules for breakfast. She held Jackson's hand under the table while they listened. Daniel spoke first. Polite, careful. Spoke of concern and stability. Claimed she had run off in the night, dragging his nieces and nephews to uncertain conditions. Claimed he had tried to help, tried to reason. Claimed she was not fit. She didn't flinch. Then it was her turn. She stood up slow, her hands clenched so tight she could feel her own heartbeat in her palms. She looked straight at the judge. "I left because I had to. Not because I wanted to." She told the truth. Not the whole story, but enough of it. Enough to make it clear that no one had come looking for the children until there was land and inheritance involved. Enough to show what it cost her to keep them fed warm and whole. She didn't cry, but her voice caught when she said, "They are mine, and I will not hand them over just because a man wants what he never earned." The judge listened, watched her like a man measuring something real. Then Jackson stood, said his name clear and plain. Said, "I've seen her work a winter that would broken most men. I've seen her keep those children clothed and fed with nothing but grit and her own 2 hands. That's not uncertain. That's strength." The courtroom was still. The judge leaned back, sighed, and said, "Case dismissed." She sat down slow, as if her bones had melted. Daniel stormed out, didn't look back. His boots echoed down the hall like a man who had lost more than he could admit. Outside, the air felt cleaner. She turned to Jackson. "Thank you. You don't owe me that." "I know," she said, "but I'm saying it anyway." They rode back in silence, but it was a different kind now. Softer. Like the land itself had shifted under them. The clouds had broken wide open above, and sunlight stretched long over the hills. That night, after the children were asleep, she stepped out to find him mending a bit of fence by lantern light. "You never said what you want," she said. He didn't turn around. "What I want. For yourself." He set the hammer down slow, looked at her. "I want this," he said. "A home that doesn't empty itself out when things get hard. A place where someone stays." She nodded. "I want that too." He reached for her hand then. Not fast, not desperate, just steady. And she didn't pull away. Summer settled over the valley like a long-held breath, warm and slow. The fields came alive with the sound of crickets, and the creek ran full again, clear enough to see the smooth stones at the bottom. The children ran barefoot through the tall grass, skin browned by sun, hair tangled and wild. Laughter filled the air, unguarded and loud. It was a sound that hadn't existed when they'd first arrived. She found herself smiling more. Not big, not often, but real. She worked alongside Jackson through the days, fixing the barn roof, tending the garden, helping with branding. He taught her to shoot properly, not just with desperation, but with patience. She showed him how to get a baby to sleep when the colic hit after midnight. There was a rhythm to it all now, a life worn in like good leather. One afternoon, while sorting seed near the shed, she found an old carved toy horse buried in a crate of tools. worn nearly smooth, one leg missing. She turned it over in her hands for a long time before carrying it inside. Jackson was at the table writing in a ledger. "This was his, wasn't it?" she asked quietly. He looked up, eyes catching on the little figure in her palm. His mouth opened, then shut. "Yeah," he said. She didn't press, just set it gently on the mantel. That night he found her by the back steps peeling apples again under the stars. He sat beside her, not speaking for a while. Then his name was Eli. She waited. "He used to climb the rafters in the barn when I wasn't looking, thought he was a hawk, said the ground was boring." He shook his head. "He was always louder than I knew what to do with." She could hear the ache in him, still raw after all those years. And something else too, guilt maybe, or longing. She touched his arm lightly. "I'm glad you told me. I didn't know how. You just did." The quiet between them was easier now, full of things that didn't need to be said. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and he let her stay there until the cold crept in and the fireflies disappeared. In the weeks that followed, the house began to change. Subtle things. Jackson moved his books into the main room. She hung a strip of faded fabric by the window. May began calling him Papa when she thought no one was listening. One morning she found him outside at the woodpile holding a small box. He cleared his throat. "Been meaning to give you this." Inside was a ring. Simple gold, the kind worn by a man who didn't buy things for show. He said, "I know you don't need me. That's clear. But I'd be proud to stand beside you. Not because you can't do it alone, just because I want to." She looked at him, at the man who had offered shelter without question, who had protected what wasn't his and made it his anyway. "I want that too," she said. "But I won't wear it because I owe you anything." "You don't." "Then I will." They married beneath the cottonwood tree out back, the one that bent like an old man toward the sun. The children picked wildflowers. A neighbor read from the Bible. No choir, no guests in fine clothes. Just wind in the grass and hands held tight. After they shared stew and bread under the open sky. The children danced in circles until they fell down laughing. And as dusk settled, she stood with Jackson at the edge of the field, watching the last light dip below the hills. She rested a hand on her belly where something new had begun to grow, quiet and sure, like everything else they'd built. He looked down at her hand, then at her. His voice was low. "You sure?" She nodded. "I'm sure." He smiled, and it was the first time she saw it fully. Unburdened. True. Behind them, the house stood, strong windows lit from within, the sounds of life echoing through the wall. Ahead of them, the fields stretched wide, green with promise. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. Stay close, because the West always has another story waiting just beyond sight.